Good evening, lovely listeners, and welcome back. Tonight, we are going to be listening to some scary ghost stories. There are 40 of them in store, so this should be a relatively long video. So you guys can grab some coffee or tea, sit back, relax, and get ready to take another journey into the night. My grandfather died in his home in 2004. My grandmother went on to live another 14 years in the same house. About 6 months before she died, we had to move her to a home for full-time care. My nephew moved into the house not long after. He said he would hear someone walking. His friends heard it as well. So we kind of joked that it was Pops looking for Nanny. Ha ha, right? So this continued for 6 months, him hearing someone walking around the house, in and out of the master bedroom. That is, until Nanny died. The noises stopped. I guess Pops found her, and they moved on, because there haven't been any noises since. So I was 18 years old. It was summer, and I had been enjoying my freedom before college started. It's June 6th of 2018. I remember because it's my grandma's birthday, and it was a Saturday. So the day for the most part was normal, until sundown. I was talking with my mom over trivial things until I heard the living room door click. The walls to the house are fairly thin, so I can hear even the quietest conversations from any room. I know this door specifically because of a certain distinct click that it makes. It's 6 p.m. and I'm excited, thinking, holy shit, my sister's finally home. So I wait for her to come in, until my phone rings. It's my sister, and she answers, "Hey dude, what did you guys eat for dinner today? I'm on my way home from work." I'm a bit weirded out from the sound of the door, but brush it off. I mean, hey, I live across the street from a hospital, so I'm used to seeing, hearing, and feeling things. So hours pass, I get up to shower, and I can hear my mom on the phone with my grandma since it's her birthday, and I decide to move to the living room. But my sister stops me, and she looks a little shaken. She tells me that she had been watching TV for a bit when she decided to talk to my mom. When she's heading over to the room, she hears someone crying. She assumed maybe our grandma died and is preparing to comfort my mom. As she gets closer, the wailing gets louder. When she opens the door, nothing. My mom was laughing and happily discussing events with Grandma. Weirded out, she tells me, and I tell her about the door. I'm Mexican, so ghost stuff is something you grow up hearing, but this stuff sounded kind of like a banshee since she mentioned wailing, but didn't say anything to her at the risk of sounding unhinged. So 2 things happened, but I guessed again that it was harmless stuff. Mostly denial, I guess. Later, as I was getting ready to sleep, my dad had come home from work about 30 minutes prior. My sister was out with her boyfriend, and my mom was already sleeping in her room. I was lying in bed, and as I read the time, 11:59, a loud pounding went off. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window, thinking someone was knocking on my window, or the door, or a truck hit a pole. Several thoughts ran through my mind. Meanwhile, my mom woke up in a daze. The dogs were going absolutely ballistic, and my dad ran outside with a bat he had. I follow behind him and look outside. I had a feeling it wasn't an actual person, because it sounded close to thuds, like someone dropping stuff or falling. And the streets are silent. No neighborhood dogs were barking, no cars in sight. For once, in the bad side of town, the streets were dead silent. I looked over to my dad. I had never seen him so terrified in his life. He told me he was watching TV when he heard the thuds, and I brought up the logic, not to sound like a horror cliche, but because only our dogs heard it, the noises had to have come from inside the house. It was no understatement to say that I didn't get any sleep that night. I was home alone all day the next, but I kept wondering. Those banshee legends kept coming to mind. In a panic, I kept thinking, holy shit, what if someone in the family dies? Of course, everyone in my house brushed it off, despite how shaken we all were. After that, days went by without incident. Sure enough, 2 weeks exactly from that day, and while we're all sitting in the living room watching novellas, my sister pipes up. Hey Mom, what's Jose's daughter's name? Emily, my mom said. She's the middle daughter of 2 other kids. I saw her when she was 3, but that was 10 years ago. I always wanted to have a good relationship with them, but because of a nasty divorce, a feud between families ensued. My sister replied, she's dead. Supposedly her mother and her children with her new man were driving back into town when the driver did an illegal U-turn and the car flipped and she died in the hospital later. I don't like jumping to conclusions, but I wonder if it wasn't a banshee and if they were warning us of this death. This happened around early mid-July 1994. I was 6 at the time when this happened, and my memory is a tad fuzzy. My folks and I moved from Washington, D.C. to Knott's Island in North Carolina, the most redneck part of the state, due to my father being in the Navy. After some time, we moved into our new home. My dad had to go to San Francisco to study. My older brother was on a naval ship, and that left me and my mother in the new place. One night, I was in my parents' bed and I woke up having an odd feeling. At the foot of the bed, and what I could tell by how dark it was in the room, was a man. He placed his index finger to his lips, indicating that I should be quiet. He mouthed that he was protecting and keeping an eye on my mother and I while my father was away, and then he vanished. My mother woke up not long after, asking why I was up. I explained what happened to her. She searched the entire house and didn't find the mysterious man. My father was recently diagnosed with a terminal illness. He was doing very well there for a long time, but in June of last year is when he started to go downhill. Ever since, I've been checking on him constantly. I live in another town, and during our last phone conversation, he started telling me about the man in the black coat that's in the house. He told me that he sees him out of the corner of his eye a lot, and that the dog constantly stares at the back of the living room as if something is there. Last Christmas, we were taking pictures in the den, and while my sister had her phone on, ready for pictures, a huge orb flew right in front of her screen. After going to visit him a few days ago, I've personally seen this man out of the corner of my eye as well, in my dad's bedroom. I'm afraid of who or what it could be. I don't know if this is an evil spirit waiting for my dad to get weak enough to finish him off, or someone to guide him to the other side. A few months before my grandfather passed away about 20 years ago, he saw the same thing. I've heard that there are some ghosts that haunt bloodlines, but if so, then who was this person when they were alive, if they even walked the earth as a human at all? I'm getting really scared about the whole thing, and I'm afraid that one day the man in the black coat might come for me. This is a short story, but it's the truth. When I was really young, maybe around 6 or 7 years old, I was terrified to sleep by myself. Nightmares used to be a normal occurrence when I was growing up, and not just basic ones, almost lucid, as well as the non-stop feeling of being watched. One night in particular, I was woken up by one of these and I was crying. I slowly walked down the stairs as I was roomed on the 2nd floor, and I went into my mom's bedroom as I had done many times before. I laid beside her, looking out the door at the open stairway. I had looked away for a split second, and when I looked back, there it was. I'm not sure what exactly the being was, but it looked so similar to a gray alien, except it was almost white. It was just standing there in the light of the hallway, watching me, with immensely dark eyes like it had been watching me all night. I can't remember anything else other than the entity was just watching from the stairs into the dark bedroom. I haven't had any other experiences like this, but on some nights I start getting that feeling again of being watched, or like something is waiting for me to fall asleep. When I was 11, in 2001, my grandparents moved from Florida to Tennessee to be closer to my father, as they were approaching 80, and my grandfather had been having heart problems. My parents have 5 acres and ended up placing a mobile home on their property for my grandparents to live in. I'm assuming they shared our mailing address, but they had their own phone number. About a year after moving, my grandfather had a stroke while walking down his stairs on the front porch. The ambulance was called and he went to the hospital, but he died about a week later. My grandmother was a very brittle diabetic, and my grandfather took care of her. She lived almost another year after he died. A few months later, in the middle of the night, there's a knock at the front door. My bedroom is right next to the living room, so I immediately woke up. I run to my parents' room and tell them that someone is at the door. My dad answers the door, and it's a police officer responding to a 911 call. They had received 2 calls and hang-ups from my grandparents' telephone number. The trailer wasn't even on our property anymore, and the utility lines had all been disconnected months before. My dad explained this to the officer and he left. It happened again, not even a week later, and then it never happened again. I suppose it's kind of a simple story, but damn, it's always scared the hell out of me. This is a story about when I used to live in Thailand. I'm pretty young, and this scared me a lot. It all started when my parents took us for vacation to the beach. They got a pretty cheap hotel about 3 minutes walking distance from the beach. It was near this really busy hotel full of kids, so you would always hear kids shouting all the time. My first night, it was nice, except for when I heard a kid shout and it woke me up. I thought it was from that hotel, but it was 2 o'clock in the morning and they must have been sleeping, and it was a really sharp scream. I got a little scared, but I didn't have the balls to wake up my parents, who were sleeping in the next room. I didn't mind it and went back to sleep. When I woke up, I couldn't find my phone, and the lamp that I had left turned on had turned off by itself. I asked my sister if she had done it, and she said she didn't. I was really skeptical about that. I had some fun times, so I forgot about it, but that night I heard a kid crying, saying, "Don't do it, please." I got the hell out of my room and woke up my sister. She slapped me and told me to go back to sleep, so that's what I did. But on the same night, I woke up to what I thought was a shadow of a kid. He kept saying, "Help me, he's coming." At that point, some people might say I was hallucinating, but I wasn't. It was pure reality. Dumb me didn't say anything. The next day, we met a Belgian man that lived next to the hotel. In a sarcastic tone, he said, "So, did you sleep well?" My mom didn't get it, but I did. The last day before we went back, I saw a gardener outside. He was pretty old and I hadn't seen him before, but I didn't think anything of it. After we got back, I spent about 9 hours on the computer trying to research the area, and what I found was terrifying. Where I slept was the house of Thailand's most notorious murderer. What I found was that he was a Chinese man named Si Kui that had immigrated to Thailand to work as a farmer. He also did some gardening. What they didn't know is that he would also kidnap young children and eat their livers. Now, it all made sense. My class visits this one school a couple of times a week. We go there to do some work and to fix things. There's this one guy that looks exactly like me, but he looks sad and depressed and kind of creepy. Every time I see him, it makes me feel weird and uncomfortable, and I don't know why, but he scares me. This might sound dumb, but today he walked past me and looked me straight in the eyes like he knew something. I'm kind of scared to see him again. This story happened to my grandmother while she was a professional nurse on night duty at a hospital for terminally ill patients, as well as for extremely disabled patients. It wasn't unusual for cats to sometimes get into the hospital. The nurses would just catch them and take them outside. One night, the nurses called my grandmother and said that there was a black cat in the medicine room and that they couldn't get close enough to it to get it out. My grandmother took sheets and they went into the room. The one nurse and my grandma threw a sheet over the cat and tried to take it out that way. They struggled to get the cat out and they called some of the other staff to help. While trying to get it out, my grandmother says that the cat made the most hair-raising and scary noise she'd ever heard. She described it as a human scream. When they got to the door and opened it, and opened the sheet, the cat was just gone, as if there'd never been a cat there. A lot of weird things happened at that hospital, but that was one of her creepiest stories. My boyfriend and I were just chilling in his living room the other day, and I was watching him on his Xbox. Out of nowhere, my heart went a little funny, kind of like getting palpitations, and I got this cold chill all over. His dog was sitting in the door frame facing the hallway and wagging its tail. A few minutes later, he made a little noise, and then the dog moved to face the sofa. He just sat there, wagging his tail. I looked at the sofa, and it was like I could see someone, but at the same time nothing was visible. My boyfriend asked me why I was so quiet, and I told him to turn around. Without even seeing his dog first, he sees the sofa, gasps, and just goes silent. I told him about how I felt the presence in the hallway, and we both noted how the dog was acting. He thinks maybe it's a relative that passed away a few years ago. It had to be somebody his dog knew, after all, because the dog was excited to see them. But ever since, I feel like someone's, or something's, watching us from the hallway. This event goes back a few years to an apartment that I used to live in. It was a house split into 2 apartments, and we lived on the bottom floor. I should note that it was normal for my husband to go upstairs and hang out with the other people for a while, leaving me alone. Plus, the part of the building it took place in couldn't have had anyone walking outside, but I'm getting ahead of myself. While I was in the bathroom, I heard someone walk into the kitchen and start to whistle a tune. I could hear them opening cupboards, and of course I assumed that my husband had come back. The whistling stopped for a few seconds, and then they started the tune again from the beginning. They stopped again, cutting the tune short, and started again after a few seconds. At this point, I noticed that it sounded the same. Not just the same music or the same tune, but like someone had an event on repeat. All the noises were the same. This happened a couple more times, and each time the tune got shorter and shorter, until it was nothing but them repeating the same first note over and over again in fast succession, while getting closer to the bathroom. I looked at the door handle and tried to brace it so nothing could open it. The whistler got faster and faster, and then held the last note at an unhuman pitch that became distorted. The note was held for so long that I thought I'd be trapped in the bathroom until someone came down. And then, silence. I'm not sure how long I paced around the bathroom before I got up the nerve to open that door, but it felt like hours. Whenever I'm by myself and I hear whistling, it makes me freeze in place, and I hope this thing never comes back. A few years ago, my friends and I decided to go on a summer trip to Baveno in Italy. We rented an Airbnb, a beautiful old villa. It was called Villa Anna, and we never knew why because the host didn't speak English. During the evening, we were all having a drink in the living room, and I felt something grab my hair, strongly and quickly. I turned to my closest friend. I was about to ask her to stop, but I saw on her face that it wasn't her. If it was a game, she wouldn't have reacted that way. It's getting late, and we decide to go to sleep. I'm sleeping on the couch near the front door, and my other friends were in a room. I had a lot of trouble falling asleep, and I didn't feel comfortable at all. Suddenly, around 3 o'clock in the morning, we heard the doorbell ring. Just once, but it was very long and very loud. I was scared. I told my friend that there's no way we should open the door. I mean, it's creepy to ring people's doors this late. I hid behind the window to observe, and there was no one. The automatic light didn't switch on either. We didn't even hear footsteps behind the door after the sound. Terrified, we went to see our friends in their room, and they were awake, but they didn't hear anything, and it was a loud noise. I wouldn't really know why this happened. I don't know what it was, but it definitely freaked us out. I was around 11 or 12 when this happened. I had a German Shepherd that I would often take for walks just to get out of the house. I was homeschooled, and I was also taking care of my sick mother, so it was nice just to go out and go for a walk. We would go twice a day, once in the morning and once at night. Well, on this night walk in particular, I remember the moon being bright, and I remember enjoying the music that I would listen to on our walk. We would walk 1 or 2 miles to a certain checkpoint and then turn back home. I'm partially deaf, so when I listen to music it's pretty loud so I can hear it. I do keep a close eye on my surroundings. We lived in kind of a country area, so cars would only come through at night once in a while. My dog was fearless and capable of keeping me safe, as 2 dogs had gotten out and she took them both down to protect me without an injury. So safety wasn't too much of a concern for me. Well, in this night, when we turned back, we were almost home when all of a sudden I heard horse hooves behind me, like they were gaining speed fast. They had to have been loud if I could hear them. I whipped around, only to notice these huge black horses, bigger than any regular horse I'd ever seen, and a black carriage a couple of feet away. They were coming in fast. I looked at my dog, thinking I was crazy, but I saw that she was panicked and was unsure of which way we should run. All I could think is, it's too late, and I panicked and braced myself for the impending hit. I closed my eyes, and nothing happened. I opened them, and it was all gone, like nothing was ever there. Still to this day as an adult, I have no idea what happened, what it was, or if I'm just crazy. But if I am, then so is my dog. I've always thought maybe it was ghosts from old settlers, but I still have no idea. My grandfather was nearly 90 years old, and he'd been living in an Alzheimer's and dementia care home for about 6 years. At this point in his life, his memory was very poor. He had memories of his long-distant past, but he couldn't retain anything new. When I visited him, he thought that I was my father, but anything you told him he would forget in about a minute on a good day. He was happy all the time, never sad or angry, just happy. He would love to meet the nurses over and over again. He was just a jolly dude. Now let's skip to my father. He was in a hospice care in my house from a very, very aggressive form of brain cancer. It killed him in 17 days. My house is about 3 hours from my grandfather's care facility, but when my father died on that March day, I got a call from my father's brother, my uncle, who tells me that my grandfather has taken a strange degree of a turn. The nurse that called him was saying that he just kept repeating, "I can't eat. Someone very close to me has died." No one had informed my grandfather that my father had died. No one had gotten the word to him, and he probably wouldn't have retained that information even if they had. Every time they tried to feed him, he said, "I can't eat. Someone very close to me has died." He did this for almost 3 days, and then he started eating again. This is the part that's really striking to me. Like I said, even if you told my late grandfather that his son had just died, he would be instantly very sad, but after a minute, he would be confused as to why he was sad, and then he would snap back to being happy. But for 3 days, he was sad about losing someone, and no one had ever told him. No one had actually seen my grandfather in about 3 weeks. All of his family was close to my house or at my house due to my father being in hospice care. I don't know how to explain it, but it's just one of those things that makes me feel like the universe is far more unknown than we think it is. I don't know if this is strictly paranormal, and it's possible, maybe even probable, that I was dreaming with my eyes open, but it was strange nonetheless. I've had many paranormal experiences, and I've had 2 experiences that I can confidently say were precognition. One that I believe was a precognition that has not yet come to pass. For this experience, I was tired and I was laying on my couch, sort of drifting between being awake and being asleep. My eyes were half open, and I got this feeling that I can't put into words. But every time I've had a precognitive event, I've been in this state. As I'm laying on the couch, a woman walks, sort of glides into the room quite gracefully. Her face and entire being is kind of unclear, almost like she's blurred out, but I can immediately sense that she's a female. She's wearing a dress that is solid and not solid at the same time. It kind of flows like smoke, and the dress's color shifts between white and black. I can't see her face, but I could sense that if I could, she would have a pale and sorrowful face. She glides over to me and puts one of her hands over my eyes. It isn't cold or warm, but comforting. Then she leaned down and whispers sadly into my ear, "You are going to die." I could sense that she meant soon. I'm not sure if she meant literal death or dying in some sort of metaphorical sense. And then she dissipated. My first reaction when she said it was an immediate acceptance of it as truth and fear. I thought, she's right. I know this is a creepy experience, but she didn't give off an evil vibe. She gave off a loving vibe, actually. The word mother comes to mind. I could tell that she cared about me and was worried about me. Maybe she was trying to warn me of something to come. Obviously, I'm still alive, so I'm not really sure what to make of it. I shared a bunk bed with my brother, and I was on the top bunk. One day, I woke up at some point after sunrise, but before it was time for us to get out of bed. I was near the wall that the bunk bed was up against, and I was facing it. I flipped over and opened my eyes, and when I did, I saw myself in my bed, looking right into my eyes. I was scared shitless, so I flipped back over and covered myself with the blanket before eventually falling back to sleep. I haven't seen my doppelganger since, but that was easily one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. My Nana died on the 16th of April, 2012. I was only 12, but we had an extremely strong bond. After a 15-year battle with cancer, she passed away. She was a very strong, stubborn, but kind woman. I didn't really get any signs of my Nana being around other than the odd butterfly landing on me or certain birds in my garden landing right next to me. But fast forward to the 17th of April, 2017. I was feeling extremely down and missing my Nana so much. I was quite sick and feeling very poorly, but I have stomach problems often, so I didn't think anything of it. That was until I had this intense feeling that I should take a pregnancy test. I don't know why, but I literally felt like I was being told to do it. And I was pregnant. I couldn't believe it. I really think my Nana had something to do with it. Fast forward to my gender scan. My partner and I were sitting in the room while a nurse did an ultrasound. As soon as we found out I was having a boy, the bin in the room suddenly opened and closed, startling all of us. We were nowhere near it. My family and I always used to joke about how my Nana cleaned everything up no matter where she was, so I really believe it was her saying, "Hey, I'm here and I'm happy for you." Since then, not much has happened, until the other day. She came to me in a dream. It wasn't sad or scary. We were in the local supermarket and I saw my Nana in the frozen aisle. I ran up to her saying, "Nana," and hugged her. It felt so incredibly real. I remember the feeling of her arms around me and the smell of her clothing. I woke up thinking I was going to be mad, but now I think she really did visit me. I dream of odd things all the time, but this was particularly odd. The other day I was finally sleepy and went to bed at around midnight, as usual. I had the typical dreams that I'm familiar with, and that went on for a while. They weren't unpleasant dreams at all, just strange. Then all of a sudden, I found myself having a view of my room, with me asleep on my bed. It was like I was floating at the corner of the room, overlooking everything. I saw myself sleeping, and there was a dark figure by the foot of my bed on the right side, like it was just staring at me while I was asleep. It's identifiable, even in the darkness of my room, if that makes sense. I couldn't make out if it was human or what. Seeing such a thing didn't make me panic, but it did make me curious. Then all of a sudden it was like I got pulled by force through an opening, and then I opened my eyes and I was in bed. I could feel my whole body ache, like I'd been in one very rigid position for a few hours. I looked at the clock and it was exactly 3 a.m. I looked around the room and nothing was there. I don't really know how to explain what I saw. My squad that I volunteer with is fairly busy, usually running around 5,000 calls a year as EMTs, so we're pretty well rounded on seeing some pretty messed up calls, and run-of-the-mill ones. It was my night to do an overnight shift with my partner. We usually like to get there early to give the day crew who's been running their butts off all day a bit of a break. We arrived at the building to find that the ambulance was still on a run, so we set up all of our stuff and waited for the crew to get back. About 10 minutes later, the crew returned, looking like they had just finished bawling their eyes out. We asked them what was wrong, and the crew chief said they just finished up CPR involving an 18-year-old girl who was pronounced at the hospital. I saw that they were pretty torn up about it, so we told them that we would finish up the last 30 minutes of their shift. Fast forward to about 2 a.m., my partner and I were hanging out and watching some movies, waiting for our next call, when we heard a girl laughing coming from the ambulance bay. My partner and I brushed it off as one of our EMT thirds gossiping on their phones with a friend, but then we realized that only we had signed up for this shift, so my partner and I went to go investigate the noise. As we got closer to the door that led to the into bay, the laughs started getting louder. By this point, we were both pretty petrified, but we still wanted to know what the fuck was going on. So, we went out into the bays and found the noise coming from the back of the ambulance, and both the back doors open. My partner and I peeked around and we both saw a translucent girl, about 18 years old, sitting on the cot. My partner and I were both paralyzed with fear. The girl looked up, pointed at us and said, "Bye," and then disappeared. We didn't sleep that night, and I will never do a night shift again. When I was younger, my family had decided to rent a new house. The first nights were pretty normal and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. After a couple of days or so, I went to bed later in the night after we all finally got our beds in. I shared a bed with my twin, and he's a pretty deep sleeper. I was halfway asleep when I looked toward our door, and that's when I saw the figure of what appeared to be our dad, standing and staring at me. I thought this was kind of odd. I felt my brother on the other side of the bed for me, which confirmed that it wasn't him. I remember quietly asking, "Dad?" But when I blinked in a second, he was gone. What's harder to explain is that the figure had a glowing presence, and it was wearing a shirt that my dad used to love but that he had lost before we moved to that house. I'm not really sure what I saw. My dad was still alive. I don't know if it was a ghost, a doppelganger, or something else. I live in a house that was built by my grandfather. It's pretty big. 3 garages, 6 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, 2 living rooms, and 2 kitchens. But the room that I'm focusing on for this story is my room. When I was younger, maybe 7 to 9, I woke up to a man in my closet. I closed my eyes and he was gone. A couple days later, I woke up to pitch black, probably 2 to 3 in the morning, but I felt panic in my heart. I started to rush and I felt like I wasn't alone, and when I ran to turn on the light, I couldn't touch it. Generally, I can always navigate in the dark. My mom ran into my room and saw me crying on the floor. Nothing happened for a couple of years, so let's skip to age 12. I always felt someone with me. Not necessarily something evil, just like someone watching me. At least once a day, my door would open and close like someone was entering. My friends and I wanted to investigate, so we set up an iPad in my room and FaceTimed with my phone around midnight. My door opened and my chair moved like someone had sat down. 2 pencils fell off my desk and then my bed creaked. Nobody was home other than another friend, but they weren't in my room. When I was 14, a couple of nights ago, I heard my bath running. I naturally thought it was my sister, so I thought, whatever. I felt sick, so I went to my mother's room, who wasn't home at the moment. The bath emptied, and I heard my sister knock on the door and saying, "Why did you run 2 baths?" My response was sarcastically, "Maybe the ghost did it." My sister freaked out. One thing that's been happening throughout this experience is that whenever I look down the stairs into our entrance, I feel major panic. I feel sick and in danger. I have no idea what this could be. This happened a few years ago. I was still living at my mom's house and I was up late as per the usual. I was hanging out on the living room couch, trying to find something to watch, but oddly the cable wasn't working. I eventually fell asleep, but then I suddenly woke up to static white noise on the television, and under the living room light and fan was a big old lumberjack, looking super scared to see me looking at him. I screamed and ran toward him and turned on the light, and he was gone. I'll never forget the look of shock and surprise that the ghost of the lumberjack had of seeing me. It was like I was seeing something that I wasn't supposed to. I'm not sure if this is exactly scary, but it's certainly something that I haven't been able to explain. I was about 4 or 5 years old and living in the Philippines, and I had this eccentric neighbor who was a sweet middle-aged woman that lived on the floor above us. The memories I have of her include the fact that she gave me a dog who immediately died the next day, and that when I got a pet bird, her cat ate it the next day as well. But other than that, she was a pretty nice lady who would always feed me and give me toys. One day my mom went to work, and so this neighbor had to watch me for the afternoon. I remember she bent down to pick something up, and I noticed 2 little red horns buried under her dark black hair. The one on her, I want to say left side, was broken in half, and the other was sharpened to a point. My little child self thought they were fake, and so I placed my hand on the point, trying to take them off so I could observe them. She swatted my hand away and immediately bolted straight up and told me never to touch them and to never do that again. The rest of the night pretty much went on without issue. The story is pretty anticlimactic, but I've been trying to make sense of this for 16 years. I tried to look up genetic issues, birth defects. Nothing really came up that was remotely similar to what I saw. You would think, or at least I would, that if it was some sort of birth defect, she just would have explained it. And I don't know why she would swat my hand away like that, because she had never been violent before. I wish I could meet her again or find some way to get into contact with her, but the complex we lived in has since been demolished, and I haven't been back in my home country since I was 5. This happened a while ago, when I was about 16 or 17. I'd been living with my eldest sister as a sort of live-in babysitter for my 3 nephews at the time, and my room was in the unfinished basement. Sort of just a big area rug on the floor, a dresser, bed, and television. The usual. I was down there reading or something one day when I heard my sister's voice, as clear as day, call down to me, "Hey, come upstairs." Having no reason to think anything of it, I rolled off my bed and made my way toward the stairs. I got about halfway up when a feeling of absolute terror hit me. My hairs stood on end. My skin crawled. It was the middle of the day. The sun was shining brightly through the many windows of the entryway that sits atop the open stairs. I try and shake it off, wondering what in the world is going on. I get to the top, and the feeling only gets worse. I call out my sister's name, realizing something quickly. It's silent in the house. Anybody with any number of young kids, especially 3 boys all under 10, knows that that does not happen. There's a little carpeted set of steps that lead to the always open French doors of the main house. I don't see anyone inside, and as soon as I take a step toward them, my heart leapt into my throat. I have never been afraid of anything like I was in that moment. On a whim, I walked away to check the attached garage for her car. I had just opened the door when I heard her voice say again, "Come in here." I glanced into the garage and saw that her car wasn't there. I was home alone. I didn't waste any time. I raced down the basement steps, grabbed my car keys, and noped out of there. It's been 10 years and I still don't know what happened. I told my friends and family and I got a few, "You just scared yourself, silly girl," and "You must have imagined it." But I don't think so. I'd been living out there for months by that time. I'd been alone dozens of times, and nothing like that had ever happened before. I'm not sure if this is a dream or a residual haunting of some kind, because I'm woken out of a sleep in almost all of these experiences. This seems to have become a thing over the last year. I wake up in the middle of the night, and normally I am facing the open window. At least once a month, I'll see a shadow outside, or sometimes hear a voice associated with it, asking to be let in. I normally tell it to kick rocks and go back to bed. I've already done a ritual to prevent unwanted or harmful entities or people from entering my home, and it has worked perfectly so far. Last night, there were 2 light entities by the bedroom door, but when I turned toward the window, there were 2 shadowy creatures. They said that I had forgotten to let them in, and in my groggy state I almost was like, okay, sounds legit, but then I realized, if they can't get in, they're not supposed to be here. I told them that if they can't break the barriers, then they're not welcome, and to stop trying to trick me in my sleep, because it doesn't work. I rolled over and passed out again. It still happens a lot now. I'm not sure what to call this kind of experience, but I don't know what's going on. To set the scene, we watched a Paranormal Files video last night where they went looking for La Llorona. In the warning section of the video, it stated that those researching La Llorona could possibly invite her into their lives, as could watching this video. We thought it was kind of a ploy. Later in the night, my girlfriend went into our room and laid down while I was still streaming and playing, and she took our dog with her. Now, our dog does not bark. The only time she does bark is if there's a noise outside that's loud enough for all of us to hear, and she especially doesn't bark or get defensive when I am in the house. So they're both laying there, and around 1 o'clock in the morning, our dog starts going nuts. Hair raised, barking like I've never heard her bark, and inching toward the end of the bed like she's trying to jump down but won't. Keep in mind that if she does rarely start barking, she will usually run to a specific spot and pace back and forth while barking until I tell her it's okay to stop. She would not get off the bed or stop barking until I came in and calmed her down. Everything went back to somewhat normal and I laid down. Nothing weird happened during the night, but we wake up and there's a message on my girlfriend's phone from Alexa, and it states, "It knows where you live." I believe in ghosts and paranormal, but not to the point where I connect every strange occurrence to the supernatural right off the bat. But this one kind of has me thinking. Could it be that we invited something in? Or is it just a weird glitch in Alexa that caused the message to pop up on her phone but not the activity page? I don't know if anybody else has gotten a weird message like this, but it's freaky. This happened a couple of years ago, so I'm used to having nightmares ever since I was a little kid, and I don't know if this means anything, but anyway, I went to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning. As usual, I had a nightmare, but this one was different. It wasn't scary, it was uncomfortable. I could only see random colors, mostly green and purple, and a weird sound. While I was having this weird nightmare, somehow I felt something push my legs out of bed. I was freaked out, but I didn't want to show that to whatever was pushing me. So in the middle of those purple and dark green colors, I started to see a curved, fat shape. It looked something like a swamp monster, and it was smiling at me. I think he noticed, or it noticed, that I wasn't 100% asleep. And this thing gave me a last hard push and went away. When I woke up, I was halfway out of my bed, with my legs out, and my toes, where I think his hands had been, were really hot. I never shared this with any of my friends, of course, because I didn't want them to think I was crazy, but I don't really know how to explain this. I work with this guy from Mexico, and he used to tell me these crazy stories about Mexico. The one that scares me the most is the one about the white dress witch. While in Mexico, he said every year, once a year, around 3 o'clock in the morning, he would wake up, and in the corner of his room, he would see a lady dressed in white. He would be so terrified that he could do nothing except stare at her and cry. So after he told me that, I said, yeah, right. Then he told me that he had seen her at the back of our chemical plant on graveyard shifts at 3 o'clock in the morning. Again, I shook it off and assumed he was just messing with me. Then one day, I had to go to the back and mess with some of the dryers. I was walking back and saw a white sheet floating in the wind. So I stopped and stared, and then I realized that what I was looking at was a lady in a white dress with white hair. I don't think I've ever ran so fast in my entire life. Of course, when I got back to the shift, I told them what I had seen, and nobody believed me, except my friend from Mexico. Ever since then, I've been seeing more and more weird and unusual things in the plant, and now they're starting to happen in my home. I was 8 or 9 years old at the time this happened. My mother had to move my sister, herself, and I to a shelter due to her abusive ex-boyfriend. I think my mother asked me to go get the laundry basket upstairs. Now I have to remember that I was the only male that was old enough to speak because this was a women's shelter only, and small children. I went upstairs and no one was up there except for me, but as soon as I got upstairs I had this weird sensation that I was being watched. I approached my mother's and her roommate's bedroom to retrieve the basket. As I walked back to approach the staircase, I felt a breeze, which was odd, since the window in there could not open. I shivered in fear, knowing something strange was about to happen. This wasn't the first time I had felt an eerie presence. At this time, I hadn't seen any strange phenomenon in quite some time. Suddenly, a little boy that sounded on the verge of tears called out, "Mommy! Daddy! Help me! Anyone! Please, anyone save me!" I dropped the basket, sprinting to the window to see if anybody was down there. I was so scared to see no one outside that I lost all control and started to scream until I raced downstairs. I asked around to see if anybody had heard such a thing, but no one has heard the little boy crying outside. I have seen things, but I had never heard a voice or a spirit or illusion or whatever you want to call it like that. Have you ever heard of the hide behind? I have, and I'm lucky to be able to tell the tale about my crazy encounter I had one day while I was out in the woods. It was a warm summer morning when I decided that I needed a little fresh air and adventure. I had just left my incredibly stressful job of 6 years as a case manager for the elderly. I packed my bags, broke my lease, broke up with my bum boyfriend, and moved back home with my parents. It was a huge step for me, as I had been out of the house since I was 18. They lived in a really cute part of Maine that was basically in the middle of nowhere. It was perfect, and exactly where I needed to be to figure out my future. I packed my backpack, got in my Jeep, and headed for a local hiking trail. The morning was young and full of potential. I arrived at my destination, grabbed my gear, my map, and headed out. I have never really been a fan of hiking or nature, to be totally honest, but I needed a change. The trail was beautiful, and there was so much to see and explore. And due to being so captivated by nature's beauty, the day had gotten away from me, and before I knew it, it was about 4 in the afternoon. I put my phone on airplane mode so that I wouldn't be bothered while I took some photos and wrote in my journal. I was only seeking peace and quiet. I needed to be alone, and nothing was going to prevent that from happening. I had found a waterfall and a quiet little spring where I decided to go for a dip in the water. I felt a little uncomfortable though, because for some reason it felt as though I was being watched. Occasionally I could hear branches snapping as if someone, or something, was walking around the perimeter of the spring I had discovered. I was out in nature though, so it could have been anything. I brushed it off. I quickly ate my lunch, and that's when I thought I saw something moving behind the trees. I turned to get a better look, but nothing appeared to be there. I took my phone off of airplane mode, but of course I had no service out here in the middle of nowhere. The weather suddenly changed drastically, as if there were going to be a downpour. There was no one else around, and I began to get very scared, so I headed back to my Jeep. At one point, I stopped walking to catch my breath and take a drink of water. It was then that I heard the trees and bushes rattling. I called out to see if anybody was there, but nobody answered me. I shouted a few more times just to be sure, but the only response was the echo of my own voice. I had this dreadful feeling as though someone was following me, or at least watching me from a distance. I quickened my pace because something was clearly going on, and although I was almost sprinting down the trail, the sounds remained close behind me. The faster I ran, the faster the sounds appeared to follow. Twigs were snapping and the bushes were swaying back and forth violently. The sounds were so thunderous, as if a whole army was following behind me. These sounds were not only frightening, but it seems to be the only thing I'm able to hear, and they were getting closer. I felt like I was going to vomit or pass out from the adrenaline and fear mixed together. If whatever was following me managed to catch me, I don't know what would have happened, and I wasn't about to become a gone missing poster in the local police department. I quickened my pace to a full sprint until I reached the end of the trail. I felt like I was flying on cloud 9, but I still wasn't fully safe yet. As I reached the Jeep, I saw something in the rearview mirror, standing at the entrance to the trail from where I had just emerged. This thing had to be about 7 feet tall, covered from head to toe in thick snarled hair, 2 large vampire-esque teeth stained with blood, and 2 sinister glowing yellow eyes. I blinked, and suddenly the thing was gone. Back into the woods, I hoped, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I hauled ass home and told my folks about what had occurred during my outing. I was so shaken and upset, but my parents didn't seem as surprised or as skeptical as I had expected. They not only believed me, but told me a story about these creatures called the hide-behinds. Apparently, they are creatures that hide behind trees, lurking around the woods hoping to get in reach of unsuspecting prey. The story claimed that if the hide-behind were to catch you, it drags you back to its cave, where it eats you while you're still alive. Later that week, I got my photos printed out, and much to my own horror, in every photo, you could see the same small pair of yellow eyes that I had seen at the trail entrance that day from my Jeep. It appeared to be hiding behind the trees in every photo. The next day, I got up, packed my bags, and headed back to Boston. This experience ensured that I will never hike in the woods again. After my little brush with death, I decided I was going back to school for nursing and decided to start a career in the city, far away from the woods and its dark mysteries. So, if you ever need direction in your life, I suggest talking to a counselor or friends, because a hike in the Maine woods could lead to the end of your future endeavors and a full stomach for far more frightening things than an unknown career path. My dad told me that when he had an apartment in San Diego with my mother, they both woke up one night at the exact same time. There was a really tall man at the foot of their bed. He was wearing a trench coat and a wide brim hat. The figure's face was just darkness, and the outfit was all black. The figure turned and went out of the room and down the hall. Only the figure had no gait. It was as though he floated or slid out of the room. My dad jumped up out of bed as soon as the figure left, but it was gone. He checked everything. The doors, the windows, everything was locked. They packed up and left that apartment that morning. This happened almost 4 years ago. I went to a rock quarry at night to watch fireworks with my ex. We stood on top of a rock pile for a few minutes, looking up into the sky, admiring the fireworks, when we heard something running on the dirt road below us. Instinctively, we got quiet and crouched down, thinking maybe it was a deer or a bear. What we saw was running on 2 feet, was stick-thin, and about 7 to 8 feet tall. It ran about 100 yards into the woods and was gone within seconds. I remember it vividly, and while I've recently heard about things called stick people, I don't know if that's what this was. I still don't have any explanation. So about a week after my great-grandmother passed away, I was over visiting with my grandparents, and we were all sitting around talking as usual, nothing out of the ordinary. Suddenly their landline phone rings, and the number on the caller ID shows no name, and the phone number was all zeros. My granddad does this joke he does where he gets a weird call from someone he doesn't recognize, and he'll say, "I don't know anyone named 0000000," and let the answering machine get it. So a minute later, it shows that the ominous number left a message on the answering machine, and we play it. As the message plays, there's about 10 seconds of static noise, like someone has a bad connection, and then it stops, and we hear a woman's voice say, "I love you." And we all immediately turned and looked at each other and didn't say a word. A few more seconds of static followed, and the message ended. We all recognized the voice as belonging to my great-grandmother. What adds to my belief that it was her is that she had this weird thing where she would never say the words "I love you" to anyone. She was a sweet lady, but something about those words she would just never say, even if you said them to her. So I believe she regretted that and needed to pass the message along to my granddad. Nothing else happened since, but I will always remember that experience. This urban legend concerns the area of Morosi and is well known to the locals. It is claimed that in the cemetery of Morosi there is the ghost of a girl with blonde hair and a white dress that seems to have been lost. As soon as you get close to her and you look at her face, you realize that her eyes look like glass. I will tell you what I know. This particular ghost seems to frequently appear outside the cemetery, but there are also testimonies of the girl appearing in the wider area of Morosi. There is an old rumor that whoever sees it with glass eyes has a pure soul, while anyone who sees it with blood dripping from her eyes has an unclean soul. Most of the witnesses of this ghost are taxi drivers passing through outside the cemetery. They are talking about a little girl who is looking in another direction, but as soon as the vehicle approaches her close enough, she turns to them with her innocent eyes and throws them a look that freezes their blood. There is also the testimony of a taxi driver who often spends the night outside the cemetery and once saw the girl running through the closed gate and disappearing into thin air. This legend has prompted the interest of many researchers of the paranormal who seek to find out whether there really is a small girl in the burial place that corresponds to the description of the famous ghost. It seems that in the old days there really was such a tomb. It belonged to a young girl who was killed when a car hit her and left her at the spot of the accident. Since that day, she haunts that place, and this is now the urban legend of the little girl with the glass eyes. My husband and I usually sleep really well, not normally waking up a lot, and it only takes about an hour for me to fall asleep. No nightmares or anything like that. However, last night in his sleep, my husband turned to me and started loudly groaning. It sounded almost like The Grudge, and I thought he was messing with me. I stopped him and said, "Hey, what the fuck are you doing?" I was almost laughing because he had woken me up with this weird noise right in my ear. He immediately said, "What are you talking about?" and apparently had no idea that he was making this loud-ass demonic noise, and I woke him up by asking him what he was doing. It kind of weirded me out, but I didn't think much of it because I was half asleep. I felt my phone underneath me, and he normally puts his phone on a wireless charger at night, so it was a little odd that it was his phone on the bed. I unlocked the phone to see what time it was and make sure that it wasn't my phone, and the time showed 3:33 a.m. That made me feel even weirder about the situation because I've heard that this is the devil's time or something like that. But since I know my husband is a skeptic, I didn't give it any more thought. We both easily went back to sleep, but it was definitely weird. He told me this morning that when he got up, his work phone showed that it was about 20 minutes after his alarm should have gone off, and he rushed to get ready. Then, after almost being ready to go, he looked again, and it was a time before his alarms were supposed to go off. Not sure if that has any significance, but it was a little odd to both of us. I really don't know what happened that night, but it was strange. Before my grandfather died, he gave me a small gun keyring, which I carried pretty much everywhere with me. I loved it, since it was the last thing my granddad gave me before his death. The gun was a revolver with a chamber that I could clip in so it wouldn't move, and also so you could unclip it and move it in and out. Anyway, I broke it around a month after getting it since I took it everywhere. The chamber stayed unclipped and could never be clipped back in. I was devastated, and for the first time in ages, I went to school without it in my pocket. This is the weird part. My mom, dad, aunt, uncle, and even my sister couldn't fix it. They tried as hard as they could to do it for me. As I already said, it couldn't be fixed, and I went to school without it. I came home, and instead of it being on my shelf where I left it, it was in the middle of my bed. And as I picked it up, I looked at it and realized that it was clipped in. I almost started to cry, I was so happy. I ran downstairs and asked my parents who had fixed the gun, and they were surprised as they said that no one had even been in my room as far as they knew. I was confused because if my mom and dad hadn't fixed it, then who had? My sister couldn't have done it because she was at her boyfriend's for a week. So I don't have any other explanation except that my granddad came back and fixed it for me. My 15-year-old cousin, who had special needs, just passed a couple of days ago. That night, I had a dream. See, she's never been able to walk or talk, but in the dream she could, and she told me that she was okay. I cried and hugged her, and she said that she's been feeling all the hugs we've given her before, and she was so sorry that she couldn't hug back until now. That same night, she came to my grandma, who was her primary caregiver, to tell her what dress she wanted to be buried in. My grandpa just passed a couple months ago, and I really believe he went first so that she could have someone there to welcome her. The first time I saw something, my cousin was sleeping over. In the middle of the night, I woke up for no reason. I didn't hear a noise or anything, I just woke up. With the way my room is set up, I woke up facing my open closet door. I saw my boyfriend in there, just facing me, and it was a perfect silhouette of him. It had his curly hair, his glasses, his body type, height, everything, except it was all a shadow. I rubbed my eyes and still saw it there. I then grabbed my phone from its charger and shined its light onto him, and of course the shadowy illusion disappeared. I was ready to fall back asleep until it reappeared right after I turned the light off. Even so, I wasn't scared, I just stared at it, as it stared at me, hoping that the more awake I became, the less I would see it. But at this point, I was fully awake and aware now, and it was still there, standing in my closet. I shook my cousin awake and I told her what I saw, but of course the shadow disappeared moments before I could expose it. The second time something weird happened, I was asleep with my boyfriend over Skype. We do this just because we're clingy, and we mute ourselves to make sure the other person can sleep without disturbances. I was turned onto my side, and all of a sudden I felt paralyzed. I was clenching my fists, trying to regain control of my body, and somehow was able to open my eyes, and then I saw it again. It wasn't in my closet this time, it was standing next to me. It had to have been a hallucination or something, because I heard it whispering to me, asking me to wake up and come with him. I managed to shake myself back into control and sit up, rubbing my eyes. Thankfully it was gone. I was convinced that my boyfriend was messing with me and had somehow spoken to me. I unmuted myself on Skype to interrogate him and to ask him why he would want to wake me up, but he told me that he had been muted the entire time, trying to sleep. 8 years ago, I lived in a house with my aunt and my 5 cousins. A normal day, I decided to go to bed early. I had school the next day. But early in the morning, there was a sound that I can only compare to a gong. I heard it very close, and immediately I was terrified. I couldn't move and I couldn't scream. The sound was louder every time it rang out. Then, in the corner of my bed, a voice, similar to a mixture between a man and a woman, told me to pray for myself and that he was praying for me. He repeatedly said that he was praying for me, and then it ended up saying that I should pray for friends and family, and then it was only the sound of the gong that was left, and I could move again. Crying, I went in with the rest of my family, and nobody had heard a single noise. Welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed those stories. I am so sorry that it took me so long to get this one uploaded. In case you missed the community tab update, which I will be posting shortly after this, as most of you know who read the community post, most recent one, I had left the video exporting overnight, and when I woke up this morning, all of the audio files were corrupted. So maybe this entire video is haunted because something really did not want this video to go up, but I basically just took a few hours this morning and re-recorded a bunch of stories. Some of the stories that I had in the original one were longer and some were a little better, but I just didn't have the 2.5 hours, well, which is longer, of course, with editing and all that. But the length of the original one was like 2.5 hours, so I had to do the shorter stories for this one. But anyway, I still have the other stories, and I know which ones they were, so we will have to do another haunted ghosty video soon, and I will put in those as well. A lot of them fell into the category of childhood, and a lot of you liked the creepy kid video. So I just figured I will make a Creepy Kid Volume 2 and put the longer kid-related ones into that particular video since they fit. So that is why this one took so long. The gardener is probably here, which is probably why you heard the dog barking in the last story. So I will have to wrap this up, and that is also why I didn't have a lot of time this morning to do the longer stories, because the gardener tends to stay for a while. They do several houses at once, and so like they'll come through and do the mowing, and then it's quiet, and then they do like the blowing, and then it's quiet, so it's like a process. So I was trying to wrap this all up before the gardener got here, and so I think he just got here, so I'm going to wrap this up here. But I do apologize that this took me so long to get up. I do have several other things that are just sort of backed up and waiting to export, so I should be able to get those out soon. We'll see what happens. But I hope that you guys enjoyed this. Thank you so much for being here, and I do hope that if you're new here, you will consider becoming an official lovely listener, an official member of the Conspiracy of Ravens, and hit that subscribe button, and do turn on your notifications so that you never miss another opportunity to take a journey into the night. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.